Donald Trump has a plan for his tariffs. It's not a plan the Bible approves, at least not most of it, and he may not be able to execute it all if God or the people stop him, but he does have a plan. And it's not just his plan. There's a larger group of very powerful people that have been working on this plan for about 40 to 50 years. A lot of it is documented in a paper called Project 2025, but even that's not all of it. His plan has three parts. It impacts the U.S. economy, the world economy, the future of the United States, and it at least foreshadows, if not ushers in, the end times or last days that the Bible is talking about. I'm Robert. I have a master's degree in business from Stanford University, and I'm a visiting professor at Now Theological College. And in this video, I'll explain what Donald Trump's plan is for his tariffs, based on what he's already done, on what he's clearly said, and how tariffs work in practice and how they've worked in recent history, what the Bible says about it, how his plan could badly hurt America or even destroy it as a world power, and how it foreshadows, if not even ushers in, the end times or last days the Bible talks about. I help you think biblically balanced about world events like this one, about society's issues, and about doctrinal issues, without all of the political bias and denominational bias that we typically see. If this is what you want, please like and share this video, subscribe to the channel, and let's get right into it. Donald Trump's plan has three parts. First, the claims. Up to 5 million people protested after what Trump called Liberation Day, when he imposed tariffs literally on the whole world, except Russia. And the global stock markets crashed. The US market crashed, the European market, Asian markets, they all crashed. They plummeted for days afterwards. People's retirement savings got wiped out or cut in half in just a matter of a couple of days. So millions of people went out and protested that. Trump's claims were that trillions of dollars would be pouring into the United States from these tariffs. He even said that today, the United States collects $2 billion a day in tariffs. But what he left out is that U.S. citizens pay all of those tariffs. And U.S. citizens will pay all of those trillions of dollars from the tariffs that he's imposing now. Because tariffs are sales taxes. They're sales taxes on imports. I've explained how tariffs work in an earlier video. And countries have already started retaliating. China has imposed 100% tariffs on all U.S. goods and has stopped exports of vital minerals and components for U.S. industry. Canada, Europe, Asia, the Global South are arranging trade deals between themselves that exclude the United States to fill in the gap because of these tariffs. And there's been a wide range of opinions about these tariffs, most of it negative. On one hand, Scott Lucas from University College Dublin says Trump's speech was the most economically illiterate speech I have ever heard. And unfortunately, it's hard to disagree with that if you understand economics. And on the other end, the Money and Macro channel says Trump has a plan and it makes sense. And in their opinion, his plan is to hand over all the data from government to the technology industry and to allow all of the private information of U.S. citizens to train their AI models. And that may be true and that would be very bad. But there's also a lot more to Trump's plan than that. Another claim Donald Trump makes is that it will return manufacturing back to the U.S. And that's a noble goal, but it took 40 years for the U.S. companies to outsource that manufacturing and to move it outside the United States to other countries because they didn't want to pay good wages and salaries and benefits to U.S. workers here, so they moved them overseas so they could get cheap labor. And what they took 40 years to do is not going to be reversed in a year or 2 or 3 or 5. Also, the manufacturing that is being brought back into the United States would be using mostly robots and not human workers. So it's not like there'd be a huge influx of jobs coming from the return of manufacturing to the United States, because those same companies still don't want to pay all those salaries and benefits to U.S. workers or any workers. They want the money and benefits to go to the top executives of their companies. Another claim Donald Trump makes is that he wants to punish countries that have been treating the U.S. unfairly. The problem is that there's only a few countries that have arguably even done that. It certainly isn't the Norfolk Islands on which he's imposed tariffs and there's no people there, only penguins. Or Australia, where Australia actually has a trade surplus with the United States. They buy more from the United States than the United States buys from them. And it also doesn't explain why Russia is exempt from tariffs when all other countries have to pay them. But that is part of Trump's plan, as I'll explain later. So what Donald Trump is doing is classic fascist behavior. He's painting a picture of the world the way it would have to be in order to justify what he wants to do and what he wants to do next. So Donald Trump has a 3-part plan. Part 1 is to be president for life, to be a dictator. Most of it he's already said, and the rest of it he's actually acting out. He's already talking about a 3rd term. Before the election was over, he already said he had the votes before they were even counted and told the American people that if he gets elected, they would never have to have another election. So he wants and intends to be president for life, to be a dictator. He said that he would be a dictator on day 1, He kept that promise, and he's still being one. To do whatever he wants, ignore the law, and take revenge on people who disagree with him or people he doesn't like. And there's a long list of people he doesn't like. Being president for life would also keep him from being convicted for crimes that he's committed or alleged to have committed, and that he would probably be prosecuted for after he left office. And he can behave as a dictator because the Supreme Court in October 2023 in Trump versus the United States gave him absolute immunity from any actions taken as long as they're official duties, and presumptive immunity even if those actions are illegal, unethical, or otherwise out of scope if they're done in an official capacity. But the Bible says that the king is not above the law, but is subject to it. And the Bible is clear in Deuteronomy 17:18 that not only is the king subject to the law, but he cannot rearrange the law to his benefit. Another part of being a dictator actually is the plan to replace income tax with tariffs. In one of his tariff speeches, Donald Trump referred to 1913 as a type of watershed moment because that is when income tax was introduced, and before then, the United States government was funded by tariffs. So what happened was that the burden of funding the government moved from ordinary working people and poor people to the rich who were being made rich by ordinary working and poor people. So the rich began to pay more and more of their fair share. Donald Trump wants to reverse that, to get rid of income tax, to minimize or eliminate income tax and go back to the tariff funding of the government. And one of his methods is to gut government services so the rich won't have to finance them, and they can get additional tax breaks to pay little or no tax at all. But Proverbs 22:16 says, "He that oppresses the poor to increase his riches, and he that gives to the rich will certainly come to poverty. If not in this life, then certainly in the next." And that's where crashing the economy comes in, because crashing the economy actually makes it easier for Donald Trump to become president for life, to become and remain a dictator. And the reason is that dictators have a harder time being dictators when the population is empowered and prosperous. Dictators operate best and have the most power when people are impoverished, when people don't have anything, and when people are desperate. That's how Kim Jong-un keeps North Korea. That's how Putin keeps Russia. That's how Hitler did it. That's how Hitler came to power. Hitler came to power when Germany was impoverished by the Allies and desperate after World War I. And Mao Zedong took power and destroyed the people who were educated and had resources. And Mao Zedong established communist China on a population of people that were poor and powerless. Dictators around the world throughout history have always had a much easier time ruling people who were poor. So Donald Trump crashing the economy pushes more people under, and the more people that go under financially, the easier it will be for him to maintain power, become a dictator, and remain president for life. Another one of Donald Trump's personal goals, being a dictator or president for life, is to hurt people he despises. And this would include racial minorities, particularly Latinos and especially black people. Those are the people he is deporting. He despises the people he's deporting. He doesn't care about them. And he doesn't care that most of them are innocent and have committed no crime. That's another reason that he's cutting so many government jobs, because a disproportionate number of the people that he hates, which are racial minorities, especially black people, are employed by the federal government because there are more opportunities and fairer promotion systems, more fair job opportunities there than in the civilian sector. So the more people that he can eliminate from this federal government, the more disproportionately it will hurt people he dislikes. And these are people that don't vote for him or support him. So if they are impoverished, that will help consolidate his power. And the grand scheme of what he and all these other architects are trying to do socially is to recreate a pre-civil rights social order. And if they can, a pre-union social order. And this would be a society that Trump has talked about a lot, with whites on the top, because he talks a lot about pure blood and polluting the blood of America. And those are code words for racial mixing, or having racial minorities in the population, and that's the same language that Hitler used. It's also language that was used by Jim Crow segregationists before civil rights, used by neo-Nazi racists, by white supremacists, white nationalists, and other racists today, and by the satanic enslavers back in the slavery times. And if you ask MAGA supporters, and go ask them yourself, don't just believe me, go ask them yourself, when was America great? You will invariably get a date that is before the Civil Rights Act, back in the days of Jim Crow or the days of slavery. And there's actually YouTube videos as well that you can go look for this information, where others have done interviews with them. So that also is part of the plan, and that is completely against the Bible, because the Bible says, "He that hates his brother is a murderer," and you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. The second part of Donald Trump's plan is to restore the Gilded Age of the 1700s, where there were basically three classes of people. There were rulers, there were peasants, and there were slaves. And that's one of the reasons he's appealing to the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, where the Supreme Court, again, contrary to precedent, 5-4 decision, allowed him to use the Alien Enemies Act to deport people that he despises, whether or not they're innocent or guilty. Now, before tariffs, he already started doing this by gutting the government, by destroying children's education programs, children's lunch programs, and aid to the poor. And now his party, the Republican Party, and the very wealthy people behind all of this are looking to destroy Medicare. Now, the very wealthy people who are behind all of this already did a lot of this Gilded Age. They first started it in the Reagan administration, where they wiped out pensions and instead replaced them with self-managed retirement accounts. So what that did was to take the money that would have been paid for pensions and the salaries that would have been paid to workers, but instead were paid cheaper wages offshore. All of that money went to CEOs and to Wall Street money managers. So that happened before Donald Trump came to power. Since Donald Trump has come to power again, there's been the elimination of children's education, of lunch programs, and of aid to the poor. Tariffs are the next step in executing this plan. And after that, he's going to be going after everything else that people have, which is like Medicaid and Social Security. It's like Amos 2:7 says, "For they pant after the dust of the earth on the head of the poor." The people that are behind Donald Trump and Donald Trump himself want everything that common people have. It's like Jesus talked about the rich fool. When he filled up his bank account, he filled up his grains, he filled up his barns. What did he do? He said, tear them down and build bigger ones. He didn't think about helping the people who had made him rich. He didn't care about bettering society. He didn't care about helping the poor. He didn't care about any of that. He wanted to accumulate more and more and more for himself, because that is the way of this world that is under the rule of God's enemy. So Donald Trump intends to be sort of an anti-Roosevelt. Franklin D. Roosevelt, back after World War II, he gave to the people, started programs that helped people come up out of poverty and come up out of the Great Depression, and he intended those programs to be for everyone, even though they were often held back from racial minorities, particularly black people. So Donald Trump is like an anti-Roosevelt who wants to destroy all of those things, and the people behind him is like a class of anti-Roosevelts who want to destroy all of those things and take back everything that ordinary people have. Just like he's behaving as an antichrist now, deporting innocent people without due process, and that includes innocent children in chains on airplanes being deported to foreign countries. That is what an antichrist does. That is not what a Christ-like person does. So how did tariffs help him restore this Gilded Age system, the system of basically kings and peasants? Well, he actually explains that in one of his speeches where he was talking about tariffs and how they were the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. And they were just music to his ears, the most beautiful words that he could ever hear. In that speech, he talked about 1913, where the income tax was implemented. So what the income tax did was that earlier before, the government was financed by tariffs. Tariffs are paid by ordinary people, like you and me. Income tax is mostly paid by the wealthy. So tariffs are paid by ordinary people for the benefit of the wealthy. Income tax changed that and tax the wealthy for the benefit of everyone, so that some of the money that they got for the people that made them rich in the first place would be more fairly distributed to more people in society, so for the benefit of everyone. And that is how America got a booming middle class. That is how America became the land of opportunity for people to work their way from very little or nothing up to having something substantial. And before that, in those days, especially in the late 1700s, there were no unions, there were no rights for people, there were no civil rights as we know them today. There was only the power of the ruling class. And especially back in 1798, the years that Donald Trump likes to refer to, there was also a satanic cult called chattel slavery that was the false religion of the rich in this country during that time. And that includes rich preachers and theologians who were from those people or who were pandering to those people or both. So these tariffs will again shift the burden of financing the government from the rich through income taxes to the poor, working class, and middle class through tariffs. Whereas the rich will really pay a much smaller percentage, will pay barely anything of their wealth compared to what ordinary working people will have to pay in order to afford these tariffs, which are going to jack up the price of everything. And again, it's not just Donald Trump that wants to restore this system of a ruling class, a peasant class, and a slave class. It's a large number of wealthy and powerful people like the Federalist Society, the Heritage Foundation, and so forth. And that is why some decades ago, there were people that wanted a judge named Robert Bork to be a Supreme Court judge, and they insisted on what was called the original intent of the Constitution. And the original intent of the Constitution was to create this ruling class. They didn't want to call themselves king, and they didn't have a formal king, but it was the same basic idea. There was a ruling class, not a single king, and they were called landed gentry or landowners. And then there was a peasant class who couldn't vote, and then there were chattel slaves. And nowadays they call that an oligarchy. But Donald Trump's tariffs are geared to replacing income tax to create that system. And Donald Trump's tariffs are part of the plan to recreate that royals and peasants system. And that is in direct contradiction to what Jesus Christ commanded. And what the income tax actually did was to make the government funding more in line with what Jesus commanded, which is, to him whom more is given, much more is required. And that is true in every aspect of life. So with the tariffs, it reverses this principle that Jesus commanded us to do, and instead puts the biggest burden and most responsibility on the people who have the least. Part 3 of Donald Trump's plan for his tariffs seems to be to weaken the United States for the benefit of Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, who Donald Trump has admired for many years, always speaks highly of, and he even accepted Vladimir Putin's representation of what Russia was doing regarding election interference in the United States and other matters over the words and over the information of the U.S. intelligence agencies reporting to him. And that shouldn't be a surprise, because a strong America is a bad thing for Russia. And there are plenty of articles now citing Donald Trump as a Russian asset. And it's something that's very interesting, but also very believable, because since the time that he has been in office, he has voiced Vladimir Putin's priorities. He's executed foreign strategy that advances the objectives of Vladimir Putin. He's tried to weaken Ukraine. He's trying to weaken NATO. And all of those are for the benefit of Vladimir Putin because they help Vladimir Putin a lot. And Vladimir Putin is known to have had these AI bots and disinformation farms bombarding the United States and trying to even alter election results in order to favor Donald Trump's getting elected. And it's notable that in Donald Trump's tariffs, Russia is exempt from tariffs. And that speaks about as loudly as all these other things combined. So one of the things that makes Russia more powerful in the world's eyes is when the United States breaks promises. So they pull out of treaties that the United States negotiated and even presented, weakens allies, pulling out of partnerships. All of those things strengthen the hand of Vladimir Putin of Russia. Because the rest of the world now is seeing the United States as unreliable, as being liars, as being promise breakers, and untrustworthy and unstable. And that is encouraging these countries to form alliances among themselves outside the United States, to form trade organizations outside the United States that exclude the United States. There's a group called BRICS, which is a group of countries that used to be Brazil, Russia, India, and China, but now it includes about 12 to 14 countries, and they are actively trying to get off of the US dollar as the world standard currency, which of course would weaken and hurt the United States. And a lot of that is because the United States has been so unreliable during Donald Trump's first term and continues to be even more unreliable during his second term, as far as being an ally and as far as being trustworthy and actually sticking to the promises that the United States has made. And the Bible is very clear that when a promise is made, that is not to be broken and that promise is to be fulfilled. It also shows the United States and Donald Trump as an individual as being incredibly arrogant and entitled, with a complete disregard for anyone, including friends, including allies, and a purely transactional, this transaction only approach to diplomacy, approach to the world, and that is something that the rest of the world doesn't have. And some of the alliances that the United States worked so hard to build under previous presidents have been so damaged that the United States will never get them back. And Russia and China, who are both hostile to the United States in terms of objectives, have both been able to form alliances and treaties with other countries that were not possible before Donald Trump started violating these treaties and treating allies with such blatant disregard. And all of that goes towards the objective of weakening America for Vladimir Putin. And one of the more surprising, even astonishing things about this is that as Donald Trump has promoted and praised Vladimir Putin, his followers and supporters of the United States have also warmed up to Vladimir Putin, have grown to love Vladimir Putin, and in fact support Vladimir Putin over their own president when those presidents aren't Donald Trump. And that's a complete reversal of what they used to say, saying that communism and Russia were bad, were the enemy, and now all of a sudden, under Donald Trump, They're saying the opposite, that Russia and Vladimir Putin are friends and that they're the good leaders when they're dictators and oppressors. Now, with the impact of tariffs, especially in the bigger picture of Donald Trump's plan and the plan of the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation and the oligarch class, including the Supreme Court of the United States, that is helping Trump execute these plans. What does that have to do with the future of America and even the end times? Well, let's start with America. There's a couple of possibilities. One is that America could possibly recover. God could stop Donald Trump, there could be a big voter uprising, and much of this could not happen. That doesn't look like the likeliest scenario right now, but it's possible. Another is that it does continue down this path. And if that happens, it could spell the end of America as we know it, because first of all, America would emerge greatly weakened because of the loss of allies, because of the gain of power of the other two superpowers that are hostile to the United States and its interests. And America's feeling of exceptionalism and national arrogance, especially under Donald Trump, could be punished by God. In Revelation 18:7, it says, this wicked city says, I sit as a queen, I am not a widow, and I shall never see grief. But God replies, as much as she has glorified herself and lived in luxury, give her the same measure of torment and grief. So God is pulling America down, or at least giving a warning that he will pull America down if we stay on this course. The weakness of the economy, the weakness of society resulting from these things, of not feeling safe in your home because some militaristic authority might bust your door down and deport you. People living in fear, not feeling safe in their homes because they might be loaded up on a plane and deported to a concentration camp in El Salvador. And Donald Trump is actually trying to get the Supreme Court to allow him to deport U.S. citizens that he doesn't like, the same way that he's deporting the illegal aliens. The betrayal of allies will make the United States weaker. Now, there are two examples in Scripture of this happening before. One is Babylon, and Babylon just fell in a day. There was a handwriting on the wall, and then, boom, that very night, the king was killed, the king of Babylon was killed, and Babylon was completely taken over. That's a possibility. On the other end, there's Rome, and Rome took several centuries to fall. It was a slow decline, but it eventually fell. So the United States could either do either one of those or somewhere in between. And it's important to understand that the United States does not figure into end times prophecy. The United States is really never mentioned in end times prophecy. So it could be like Egypt, that used to be a superpower and then become a minor power after that. It could be taken over, or none of those things could happen. It's God's plan, and God will execute it the way that he chooses. But one other thing that's happening to the United States right now is that God is warning of judgment on the United States, and it is something that is already starting to happen. So both from the right wing and the left wing, there are sins that they are committing that God is terribly displeased with, that he speaks against in the Bible, and that he has judged nations for. On the right wing, there's wickedness, there's hatred, there's oppression of the poor, there's violence and incitements to violence like Donald Trump has done many times, even apparently inciting an insurrection attempt to overthrow the U.S. government when he lost the election. And that's what the insurrectionists were saying, that they did it on his command. And there are preachers and professing Christians who are supporting all of this while claiming to be children of God. God is terribly displeased with that kind of behavior, and he judged Israel for it. And America is not God's chosen people, so he can judge this country too. And then on political left, there is abortion, there's homosexuality, there's transgenderism, and there's a promotion from much of the left on atheism. And all of those are sins that God is displeased with as well, and that he has brought nations down for. And it turned out that God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah for both left-wing and right-wing sins. The Bible talks about the sexual sin of Sodom in Genesis 18 through 19, but also the violence of Sodom in Genesis 18 through 19. And the Bible talks about the calloused, hard-hearted attitudes of Sodom toward the poor and those that are downtrodden and discriminated against, and refusal to help them and refusal to have compassion on them, and treating them with harshness in Ezekiel 16:49. The Bible also says in Proverbs 21:13 that whoever plugs their ears at the cry of the poor shall cry himself and will not be heard. And that's what's happening to many of Donald Trump's followers. Many of them voted for him wanting him to hurt people they didn't like: immigrants, brown people, black people, and poor people. And now Donald Trump is hurting them, and they are crying out. And Donald Trump is not hearing them. And neither are some of the people that they wanted to see hurt. And that is a fulfillment in this country at this time of that verse in Proverbs, just as God said he would do. So on both sides, these sides are both so committed to their respective sins that today they are unwilling to budge an inch from those things. Whereas in the past, they were willing to be more moderate, they were willing to be more respectful of the norms of society and of the Bible. Today, that moderation is lacking and they are both entrenched. And that is a reason that God could judge America completely, to weaken it or even destroy it or replace it as a superpower. There's even talk of secession or even civil war. Or the decline of America could be part of God ushering in the end times. And again, all of these are possibilities. It's not certain. But whatever happens, it will take a considerable amount of time for America to recover, if it recovers, if Donald Trump is allowed to continue doing what he's doing and going down the path he's going down. So what does all of this have to do with the end times? Well, this is another possibility that is a little more disturbing. And again, it's not certain, but it's definitely possible. And if not, it's a foreshadowing of things to come. Before Donald Trump was elected the second time, I'd said to my family, friends, and on social media that if Donald Trump were to be elected, that all three superpowers would be in the hands of dictators. And one possibility would be that each of the superpowers could conquer its own area and then hand over those areas to either one of them or a fourth individual who could be the Antichrist. This is a possibility just looking at the scriptures and looking what's going on in the world right now, including with this president. And it turns out that that looks to be what's happening. In fact, parts of it already are. Donald Trump has already declared intention to try to conquer Canada, to try to conquer Panama, perhaps even Mexico, to try to conquer Greenland. So he's already thinking along that track. The European Union has just issued EU-wide directives and recommendations for its citizens in the European Union to stockpile 3 days of food in case of a war with Vladimir Putin of Russia. And the UK just announced that it is preparing for war with Russia in case that happens. In addition, US authorities, including military authorities, expect China to try to take over Taiwan by about 2027 to 2030, somewhere in that time frame. China is doing military exercise and looks to be preparing for an invasion. So all three of these superpowers are already going down this path. The one wild card is Africa, because Africa is now the center of Christianity in the world. Africa has twice as many Christians as the United States has people, and Christianity has declined greatly in the United States over the past few decades. Africa has as many Christians as Europe has people, around 700 million. And Europe has become a desert for Christianity, some European countries having only 10 to 20% of their population believing that God exists at all, let alone being Christians. So as long as God's people are growing, and in Africa they're growing and thriving, Christianity is growing and thriving, that becomes a wild card. But that's still possible because there will be a tremendous persecution of Christians around the world from the Antichrist when he appears. And regarding the United States' increasing weakness, as we were sharing earlier, both Russia and China have what are called hypersonic missiles, which are missiles that travel several times the speed of sound, at least 5 times the speed of sound or more, and that are highly maneuverable and that are undetectable or it's certainly unstoppable by current missile defenses. Russia has already used hypersonic missiles in war in its war in Ukraine. And the Chinese Navy has been growing and the Army has been growing tremendously more than the United States has in terms of constructing battleships and so forth. They're building islands in the ocean off their coasts that are military bases preparing to launch invasions. So it's a very troubling time. It's a very risky time for the world. So then what about the Antichrist? Well, there's a couple of possibilities. One is if this scenario played out, I pray it doesn't, but if it played out and each of these superpowers conquered their part of the world, that they could hand over all the power to one of them, which might be President Xi because he's the more powerful of the three. It certainly wouldn't be President Trump because President Trump seems to work for Vladimir Putin. So that's unlikely. It's possible, but it's a lot less likely. Another possibility is it could be like the little horn of Daniel, where there's a fourth individual that arises that is a dictator, and all three of those figures, all three of these dictatorial figures, hand over power to him. Now, this is something that is speculative, it may not happen, but still it's a possibility. And the fact that it's actually realistically possible in this time shows that we need to be careful, watchful, and aware and be in Christ, because when these things happen, it's going to hit, like Jesus said, birth pangs, like birth pangs of a woman. Those pains are there and there's no escaping them at that time. And all of these things are going to happen very fast and very violently when they finally do happen. So we need to know Jesus Christ, receive him as our Savior, and be in him, and actually be in him, not be racist or going for alternative lifestyles or so forth and call ourselves Christians. Because whether or not they play out, the time is closer than we think, and we need to be ready. We need to be in Christ. So please like this video, share this video, subscribe to the channel. Watch this video for more information about Trump's tariffs, and this video for more Bible information. God bless you. See you there.